for people who look at Twitter in the morning and despair about the existence of politicians they can admire. So here is one. He's a good man. He's a chemist. He has a good brain. And we know, more importantly, he has a very big heart. So welcome, Chris Coons.
And I just want to welcome Senator Coons, too, who is a good friend of mine, and his wife Annie and 3 children are good friends. And we're very happy and honored that Chris is closing out our day today. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Hervé, for both the introduction, your gracious remarks, your leadership of Insight, and for your hosting this Biden Cancer Summit here in Wilmington. To Nikki Pickles and everything that you and your amazing team do at the Cancer Support Community. You have done amazing work to lead a community that is statewide and that provides a remarkable constellation of support and services to help cancer survivors and to help their caregivers, their families, navigate the challenges of a cancer diagnosis. And to Paula Swain for the support that Insight and you personally give through leadership of the Charitable Giving Foundation of Insight. Thank you for what you're able to do in partnering between these two great organizations. And to Vice President Joe Biden and to Jill Biden, who we all know are not here today. Their heart may be here, but the Vice President is in Washington leading the National Cancer Community Summit. I had a chance to talk to Joe last night, and he wanted me to convey his greetings and his level of excitement and enthusiasm for what the next stages are in the Cancer Moonshot, or the project to fund and support cancer research, was palatable. He is very actively engaged in a dozen other projects and undertakings, but as you know, this is one that has his attention and has his heart. So I think we ought to be grateful for the fact that we are blessed to be the home state of Vice President Biden and former Second Lady Jill Biden, and that they have taken out of tragedy a commitment to carry forward a commitment that will make all of us live better and healthier and longer lives. As long as I've had the privilege and the challenge of adequately representing Delaware in the Senate, one of my opportunities and one of my challenges, frankly, has been to live up to the legacy of Joe Biden, someone who made a dramatic and a lasting and a positive impact in his 36 years in the Senate, and then followed it by 8 years as a vice president. And I would argue the vice president most trusted by a president to carry out significant initiatives and roles of any vice president in my lifetime. I still remember as a then young county executive going to briefings in the old executive office building where he was leading at that point, so-called stimulus initiative, an effort to spend close to $1 trillion on both tax relief and infrastructure investment. And it was interesting to see the casual and the chatty and the engaging Joe Biden transformed into the on time and focused and delivery-oriented Joe Biden, because in moving from being a senator representing one state, a delightful and lovely state, but a fairly small one, to being the vice president of the entire United States, you could see the challenge he faced in stepping up and taking on much bigger opportunities, a challenge which I think he rose to and carried out very admirably. As you all know, there is a sad trajectory that has a common set of points between Ted Kennedy, who was a colleague of Joe Biden's and one of the great leaders in the modern Senate, John McCain, who I had the honor of traveling the world with and got to know well and was a good mentor to me, Beau Biden, all 3 of whom died from glioblastoma. What you may not know is that my mentor in the bar, the person who really I was closest to at W. L. Gore and Associates in our legal group, and had been, he hired me as a summer intern when I was in college, and he helped lead me through my bar admission process. And he was a friend and a colleague. He also passed away from glioblastoma. And it's been a striking set of experiences that I've taken a few minutes to reflect on. I love that part of your focus today is putting patients first. And I love the way that the research and the innovation and the capability for leading us towards a better future in which we have better cures is partnering with the cancer support community and recognizing the challenges of the current reality in which there are so many different types and forms of cancer which burden or challenge or harm so many of us. So let me first to Insight say it is impressive to see the growth. I was explaining to my talented patent attorney, Jamie, who's with me today, how this exact site was where Wanamaker's was. And Wanamaker's, which sat fallow for many years, got transformed through your investment into a beautiful modern site for research. And then with this building, you further expanded and made an even greater investment and brought us a big step even further forward. And now I think you've cleared out my old tire garage and are poised to make yet another investment at the bottom of the hill. Insight has developed and deployed new treatments for cancer that are so effective and so groundbreaking, they literally seem like magic. And I am excited to see the whole range of new platforms and new products that you're working on, and I am prayerfully hopeful that the FDA will yet see the wisdom of approving them and unleashing them to help improve the world. I'm also struck at ways in which at each of the ribbon cuttings for these buildings, I've shared with you a chance to hear the story of someone who had made this journey and had had a better outcome. I think it was about a year ago at the opening of this building, we heard from Sue, who was a cancer survivor who talked about how Insight not only helped pay for her medications, but literally saved her life. I think it was in 2014 at the opening of the now reimagined former Wanamaker's site where Dan Childress spoke about the importance of research and how without your research, he would not be alive and that life-saving discoveries Insight had made helped sustain him. So let me just say, if I could, then a thank you to the Insight Foundation and how you marry these two great sponsoring organizations for today's conversation. As some of you know, in addition to the friends and colleagues like Bo and John, Jim Brown and Ted Kennedy, who I've lost, my own father passed away last year, early in the year. He had leukemia for decades. And had made his way through an early CLL diagnosis with relative equanimity, but it was pancreatic cancer that snuck up and took him from us in the end. And in a way I had not expected. I ended up spending most of 3 months at Hopkins. I found out about his diagnosis literally a week before the election, so it overlapped with another unexpected event. And created a period of 3 months that was really quite challenging for me, in that I was careening back and forth between my work in the Capitol in a new political environment and being the co-chair of the National Prayer Breakfast, featuring a different speaker than I had imagined, and learning how to work and to try and do my job and my public service calling effectively. At the same time, I was trying to squeeze every last minute I could out of the remaining days I had with my father. And I think more than anything, if I had something to share with you today, that was my first experience of being that close. I've lost friends very close to me. I've had other family members. I've had neighbors. I've had childhood friends diagnosed and survive. But this was my first time literally being in the room as someone went through chemo and radiation, and a whole series of very hard conversations with my stepmother, who intensely resisted recognizing what my father very clearly saw from the earliest days, and helping them navigate a whole series of things. This is exactly what the cancer support community is so wonderful at, is recognizing that different caregivers have different needs. Some really have no enthusiasm or tolerance for therapy or yoga or group talk, and they really just want help with diagnosis and medication and leave me alone. And others, frankly, it's how they make it through, is an opportunity to share and to be part of a community with others who are on the same journey. And whether it is the children or the spouse or the neighbors or the person who is living through cancer themselves. Having that opportunity to find support from others is a unique thing. I will tell you an unexpected story, I hope, that is not related either to Insight and pharmaceuticals or to the cancer support community, but says a small thing about the Senate. Some of you noticed, a few, that earlier this year there was a very contentious nomination for Secretary of State, and a close friend of mine, Johnny Isaacson, was literally giving the eulogy for his best friend who had died of cancer the day of our vote. And he called me from Georgia to say, is there any way you can change your vote and make it possible for me to not have to leap on a plane, come racing back up to cast the deciding vote, which would be for me at 11:30 p.m. tonight? And I said yes. And it produced a fair amount of kerfluffle, and some folks were thrilled I was willing to do something minimally bipartisan. It didn't change the ultimate result, but it relieved him from what was a pretty significant burden that day. And when folks of my party, and in particular of the progressive wing of my party, who were very upset, pressed me on it, I said, let me tell you another story. I found out that my father had passed at 3 o'clock in the morning, completely unexpectedly. And I had missed my last chance to be with him because of the work of the Senate the night before. We'd had a whole series of votes. And the last votes had been held over until that morning. So we had 2 more votes to go through. So I was alone in Washington, struggling in the middle of the night, trying to figure out what I would do. And as I got to the floor to cast these last 2 votes and then get in the car and then run to suburban Baltimore and to be with my father's body, a senator I barely know named Mike Rounds, conservative Republican, former Governor Mike Rounds, comes across the floor, looks at me, and he says, I just heard what happened, and I can see in your face this is the hardest day of your life so far. And he said, so I have something I want to offer you. I'm going to pair with you. Now, Joe Biden knows exactly what that means. Most of the currently serving senators have no idea what that means, because we don't extend this kind of graciousness or comity to each other. What that meant was, you can leave, and however you would have voted, I will make sure that I change my vote, no matter the consequences to me personally, so that it doesn't change the outcome. I didn't know Mike that well, and I was so touched by that. So when people have said to me, why were you willing in a small way to be gracious to Johnny Isaacson? I always point them back to Mike Rounds. And I say, here's a guy who, he didn't know what the outcome might have been on those votes that day. Despite those consequences, he was willing to do something gracious and thoughtful. At the end of the day, what the cancer support community and what Insight Support makes possible in 100 different ways for hundreds of different people across our state is just similar small moments of kindness and grace. Whether it's dropping off a box of vegetables from a garden, whether it's helping someone master yoga, whether it's helping someone better understand diet and nutrition so that they can balance the changes in their body as a result of chemo or radiation, whether it's helping a family figure out their finances so they can afford medication that, although life-saving, is shockingly expensive and unexpectedly so, and in the face of difficulties with insurance and reimbursement. All of these are gifts of real kindness and accommodation. Let me last say, one of the greatest things I've had the opportunity to do as your representative in the Senate is to serve on the Appropriations Committee. It's got a funny name. It's really the Spending Committee. We should just call it that. We spend about $1.17 trillion of your money every year, and the 30 of us mostly fight and occasionally agree. What has, I'm sure, eluded the notice of the public and the press is that this year is the most functional, most bipartisan, most on time process in 22 years. I am the ranking on a subcommittee where Senator Lankford, a conservative Republican from Oklahoma, is the chair. It's the Financial Services and General Government Committee. It's only $24 billion. It's a small piece of the total pie. It's only $24 billion. But we've got all the things we fight about, right? The IRS, the District of Columbia, CFTC, SEC, CFPB, you name it, a lot of alphabet soup. What's the positive there? We got it done through the subcommittee, through the full committee, through the Senate for the first time in 20 years on time. And we are this close, and we think we may have an answer to how to get it signed into law in the next 2 weeks. But that's nothing. The big deal here is the big bill, which is Defense and Labor H. H stands for Health and Human Services. In that bill, this year, is a $2 billion increase in funding for the National Institutes of Health and $5.7 billion for the National Cancer Institute not a decrease as was proposed, but an $80 million increase. All I'm going to say is that I have fought tirelessly for funding for basic research, for applied research, for disease research, because I am convinced that without this funding, we don't have hope. And without hope, I don't know how I can look in the eyes of my constituents. We can discover cures for these absolutely dreaded diseases and conditions that affect so many of our loved ones. And with the resources of the richest nation on earth, and with the gifts of incredibly talented researchers, and with the opportunity to find these discoveries, why would we not do it? I think of all the things we could do with your resources, this is the best investment we can make. And by the way, this NIH and National Cancer Institute research is not all done in one building down in the DC suburbs in Bethesda. It's actually spread all over the country. It's connected to major universities and hospitals and to companies and to researchers all over our country. And they help people have careers in science, and they help people have hope. And the progress we've made is breathtaking. It was many, many years ago, I was close to someone whose father was a pediatric oncologist. And he took me on rounds with him at Emory, and they were heartbreaking. At that point, 98% of his patients died, and died in less than a year. If I were able to go visit him today, that number would be fewer than 30%. The transformation in hemo-oncology, in pediatric oncology, the transformation in a whole range of different cancer states just in my lifetime has been huge. And if you think about the consequences for the lives of hundreds of millions of humans going forward generations of those discoveries, once cured, a form of cancer does not become uncured. There remain challenges, there remain difficult disease states, and glioblastoma is one of the toughest. Pancreatic cancer is one of the toughest. I've lost in the last year people I love deeply to two of the toughest forms of cancer. But Jakafi made possible dramatic advances in tackling one of the previously toughest states of cancer. And who knows what we will unlock and discover in the year and the years ahead. All I know is what Joe Biden once said, which is that the cancer journey is full of incredible people doing exceptional things. And it is no less exceptional, and you are no less incredible, if what you're doing is helping someone who is a cancer survivor manage their budget, manage their nutrition, manage their health, than if it is you are one of these world-class researchers in a lab finding and unlocking the next discovery and the key to a cure. Both of those, the work at Insight and the service of the cancer support community, are remarkable blessings. So with that, let me conclude today. Thank you for being a part of the Biden Cancer Summit, the Delaware part, and thank you for being a participant in the most important part of the cancer journey, which is listening to each other. Thank you very much.